the scrap metal companies.
is they buy them for less than the actual value of the metal.
But they
So
must know they're hot.
yeah, there's a lot of, they've tried to get some legislation surrounding reporting of those.
I was going to ask, yeah, they do that in Missouri. They require that the seller have a driver's license and they record that.
Yeah, it's almost like the pawn, like the pawn shops. They're required to report all of their transactions, and we can access those, but they
Yeah.
just can't get it with the scrap metal yet.
So, Emily, did you solve your problem, or are you still having problems? You're okay. Okay, good. All right. I think we have everybody here that's going to be here. Nick indicated he may not be able to attend this evening, so I'll call this work session to order. We do have one item on the agenda this evening, and I will turn it over to Laura Smith to give us an update on this.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for being here this evening. I don't have a specific PowerPoint presentation for tonight, so there are times where I may pull up and refer to some of the specific charts and tables that were in the memorandum in the work session packet. And I know we provided kind of the first budget recap, 2020 year-end recap, and a first look at potential revisions for the 2021 budget. And we gave that to you at the February 3rd Finance and Administration Committee meeting. And we didn't spend a lot of time in that, knowing that we were going to have this work session tonight. So hopefully you've all had a chance to kind of dig into that a little bit, think about that some. And so I'll hit some of the high points and kind of, some of the things that we're thinking, and then really just want to open it up for kind of discussion and conversation as we think about, our path into the rest of 2021 and into the 2022 budget process, and where we want to potentially look at aligning some priorities and or making any other adjustments as we go. So I guess my first overall comment is, welcome to the world of, to a certain extent, Brian and I. So budget isn't just a 3-month process every summer. It's kind of an ongoing work in progress every year. So we stay very well connected to the numbers, as does the rest of the leadership team, just kind of watching revenues and expenses throughout the year so that we can be positioned and be flexible to adjust to any changes that we might see coming. So as you know, when we kind of hit the pandemic almost a year ago now, which is hard to believe, we started to look at impacts not long after the potential impacts to our budgets, particularly as we move pretty quickly into a complete lockdown or stay-at-home order. We built several models during the kind of 2021 budget process that allowed us to look at and model different scenarios and think about more easily kind of the potential impacts. So we built 10% and I think, well, actually 15%, 10% reductions in sales tax revenues. And then we looked at some pretty significant revenue reduction models on the Parks and Recreation side as well. 50% reductions and 25% reductions in those revenues. As we know, coming out of and getting through 2020, one of the things that we didn't have to contend with was a decline in our sales tax revenues. And we were very fortunate, and I think that was pretty consistent across at least the cities in Johnson County, and I think across the metropolitan area, that sales tax performance was as strong as most cities originally anticipated, if not better than originally anticipated in the 2020 budgets. And so that's certainly where we ended the year in 2020, and sales tax absolutely sort of carried the day and made up for a number of the other revenue shortfalls that we experienced in the budget. As we anticipated, we had hoped to lose, or we were anticipating about a 50% reduction overall in Parks and Recreation revenues. You'll remember that we made a decision not to open the MFAC last year, which financially is a decision that would make us money in any budget year because we subsidize the operations of the outdoor pool to the tune of, upwards of $125,000 annually. So that decision, while politically difficult and challenging, certainly from a financial standpoint, was one that was relatively easy to make. The community center was a different story. And as you know, we were closed entirely for almost 3 months. And we did see and continue to see significant revenue reductions at the community center as a result of just physical distancing requirements, capacity requirements, gathering limit requirements. So it was really hit across the board in all of our revenue generating categories at the community center: memberships, rentals, programs, daily fees. We didn't offer our summer camp program last summer, which is something that typically is actually a revenue generator for us in the community center. So as we outlined more specifically in the February 3rd memo, and we kind of broke it down by category because we saw some differences across the board in those membership categories, but overall, we saw about a 68% reduction in community center revenues at the end of 2020. So that was more dramatic, obviously, than what we had estimated when we revised the 2020 budget. And we were optimistic when we put the 2021 budget together, thinking that we would by the end of 2020, start to see us or be moving out of some of the more serious spikes and considerations and impacts of COVID. That certainly wasn't the case. And so also in that February 3rd memo, we started to outline, the need to really seriously look at revising the revenue estimates for the community center for 2021. We had put together the 2021 adopted budget and had estimated about a 25% reduction in Parks and Recreation revenues, and that also we contemplated opening the pool and being able to conduct the summer camp program this year. So at the end of the day, just kind of a snapshot, we made revisions on the expense side as well. The fortunate thing there was that we were a little bit further into the fiscal year to be able to have a better sense of where we were with respect to position vacancies and expenses and having the opportunity to manage projects. But we ended the year in a really strong position. In fact, we beat our revised budget expenditures. So we saved more money than we thought we were going to. And we were really able to end the 2020 year overall with all things considered a fairly minimal impact to the bottom line, which was about a $345,000 reduction in our general fund balance. We had originally estimated closer to 1.3 million. So a very significant swing there, just through a combination primarily of the sales tax performance and then quite honestly, the expenditure savings that we had overall. And actually that $345,000 impact, if you really go back and look at where we were when we put the 2020 budget together originally and adopted it back in the summer of 2019, we were already estimating about $100,000 deficit overall. So factor that in, and we really only missed that mark by about $245,000. So that allowed us to go into 2021 with a still very strong general fund balance position. As we've talked about, we have been very successful in rebuilding general fund reserves over the last probably 5 or 6 years in particular. We did that to meet the council's fund balance goal target of 25% of general fund operating revenues. And then we also were building some excess fund balance, primarily because at that point we didn't know the outcome of our tough litigation. And specifically, we were trying to build in some cushion should we find ourselves in a position, it was just an unknown what the liability with respect to the tough litigation was going to be. So that fund balance, which had been reduced intentionally back in 2010 and had grown slowly over the years, kind of grew by leaps and bounds for several years. And we were developing really what was a very comfortable and good position as we went into, as it turns out, as we went into 2021 and faced the pandemic. So that's kind of where we ended the year, which I think is a positive all the way around. But where I'd like to kind of spend a little bit of time this evening is talking about then where I think, excuse me, we need to make some revisions or consider making revisions. And it will really just be sort of action and internal controls at this point with respect to the 2021 budget. So as I'd mentioned, when we put the 2021 budget together, we actually had reduced, I think we ended up going into the 2020 revised budget with a 5% reduction in sales tax. And then we held that constant. And so no growth and additional growth in sales tax coming into 2021. I think based on the sales tax performance that we saw last year, I think it would be prudent to think that we would be able to revise those sales tax estimates upward. But we only have 1 month of sales tax collection under our belt for 2021. So certainly we want to do that cautiously and continue to monitor that throughout the course of the year. So if we were to do that, and I'm going to share the screen here and pull up kind of the worksheet. So here, excuse me, we looked at two scenarios for 2021, a scenario A and a scenario B. So scenario A is the one that was also included in the February 3rd memo. And that's where we look at bringing sales tax collections, so both city sales and use taxes here at the 3.7 million, and then intergovernmental revenue, which represents county sales and use taxes, back up to be more consistent with actual collections in 2020. You can see we took a slight reduction in both cases. Looking at just kind of a minor reduction in scenario A of our franchise taxes. You can see that in 2021, we had budgeted 1.1 million originally, estimated, dropped that number down to about 1 million. And then collected just slightly over that at 1,017,439. So I think our estimate for 2021 may be a little high. So kind of thinking about bringing that down in the neighborhood of about $50,000. Plan review and inspection fees, I think based on just the adopted budget and the activity that we're seeing, I think it's realistic to think we can see a slight bump. And again, when we get to this point in our budget process, we really do care about, thinking about those revisions. So those revisions of $50,000 or $25,000 can really have a significant impact. Left police fines the same. We did see, again, we didn't hit our estimate at the end of 2020. And that's another one we'll keep an eye on. I haven't recommended any revisions to that at this point, but we'll certainly keep an eye on that. And then community center revenues, we revised again, sort of downward to be more reflective of the actual collections, which were $635,000 at the end of 2020. But this also contemplates that we would have the summer camp program as a part of that. And then intergovernmental revenue, again, is the county sales and use taxes. This is one that we'll need to also kind of keep our eye on as we go through this legislative session. There's been a Senate bill that was introduced, which would allow counties to hold on to that portion of sales tax revenues that they're currently distributing to cities. So obviously we care about that pretty significantly because it's an important part of our general fund revenues. As that is moving kind of through the legislative session, we've determined and understand that that is an issue that is very specific to one county in particular. And so the League and Johnson County and other counties and entities around the state are sort of advocating that we get rid of that bill. Let Atchison County is where the issue is. Let Atchison County figure out their issue and let the rest of us keep the county sales tax dollars that we've, certainly rely on. And Johnson County has taken the position, that same position. So I think, again, we'll continue to watch that. But I don't at this point have concerns that that's a revenue stream that may be at risk kind of going into the 2022 budget. As we looked at, flip through. So as we looked at, I didn't make any revisions kind of in that preliminary estimate on the expenditure side yet. As we know, we typically will save at least somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $200,000 each fiscal year in our personnel line items, just through attrition, vacant positions. This year we knew we had some increases built in for health insurance premiums, which we didn't realize. We had another year of 0% health insurance renewal. So there are some savings there that we know will naturally kind of flow in and improve that bottom line, whether we look at a scenario A or a scenario B. So scenario A is sales tax, basically where it performed in 2020, and taking the community center revenues back to about a 50% reduction plus summer camp. Scenario B, that's included in that general fund summary, pulls sales tax back just slightly so that we can, again, about 7.5%, which I don't think we're going to realize, but at least it gives us that kind of model and that range and helps us draw that picture for the parameters that we might want to consider managing within for the rest of 2021. So
Mark,
haven't we do?
Quick question.
Yeah.
On your revenues under miscellaneous, what kind of things are included in miscellaneous?
It's really can be a little bit of everything. So there's probably 30,000 of the 128,000 that's shown there. I would guess maybe well, hang on, I can tell you just a second. I didn't think I had this sheet. So it's interest income, which has decreased dramatically over the last year. It's the sale of fixed assets. So any equipment or things that we might sell, that the revenues would be deposited back there.
Okay.
And then it's also, in this case, I think there's about a $30,000 input from the second half of from the city of Roland Park for our sort of de-annexation process. We got $30,000 in 2020, and the second half of that, those funds that Councilmember Flora and Inman so lost a lot of blood, sweat, and tears negotiating will come in 2021. So it's just
Some
kind of a
that too-
catch-all
some of that
category.
too is that payment from EPC for the locale. As part of the development agreement.
Yeah,
for-
they have another $50,000 that we anticipate that they'll hit is due to the city when they hit about an 85% occupancy rate up the in their complex. So so when we look at that, you know, I think I think there's some questions that we have about, you know, Parks and Recreation revenues. I think that a 50% decline, even though we saw closer to that 68% decline, I do think it's realistic to think that we will see an opening up of the community center in 2021. I think it will be realistically, I think it's going to be likely to be towards the end of the summer, early fall, before we really start to see the impacts of that. And so I do think that I think obviously the 25% reduction that we originally budgeted is not realistic, but I do think somewhere in that neighborhood of 50,000 or 50% is probably realistic. And so if you think about, you know, that first quarter, if you think about the fact that we had absolutely no revenue for almost 3 months of the year, and even though we've had significant revenue decreases since then, I don't think anybody's anticipating another full stay-at-home shutdown, close the facility, you know, type situation where we would generate no revenue. I think it's really difficult for us to, again, think about how quickly we might begin to recover there. We know that the pandemic has impacted people's preferences about where they go and what they do and how they do that. And certainly community centers, large gatherings, and fitness facilities are places where many of those difficult decisions have been made. But again, I think we do think that it's realistic to see those improvements. We are continually kind of refining and exploring the potential revenue implications that we have. In fact, you'll see in the memo from earlier this week, we actually have brought down the estimated revenues from the summer camp program. And that's because we're looking at potential capacity reductions there. And we're really kind of pushing and pulling at every aspect of that, not only from a COVID safety protocols and practices standpoint, and can we offer that program safely, but at what point with potential capacity reductions could we realistically expect that that program is going to at least break even, if not make a little bit of money for us, as opposed to being something that we would need to subsidize in 2021. One of the other things that we outlined in the memo was just kind of, I asked Penn to pull together some of the information about the revenues that are generated from some of our larger kind of longer term contract or agreement situations, and where those folks stand kind of today in terms of if they will come back when they're able. If you look at memberships, several years ago, we had negotiated a kind of a group or a corporate membership situation with Venn Solutions, where they were paying for a set number of memberships each year. And that generated about $21,000 in membership revenue for us each year. They've indicated that they certainly would not be their intention to renew that agreement as long as they've got employees that are working remotely. Several long-term rentals in the facility, Faith Alive Church, the Gathering Network, and the Church of God. As you can kind of see, as we outlined in the memo, Faith Alive Church they've currently reserved some February and March dates to kind of see who in their congregation might come back. The Gathering Network is already expressed that they will not be renewing a contract with us. And then the Church of God has indicated that if the mask mandate goes away, then they would potentially consider returning in the spring. And then you'll see some of the others, the Rotary, the American Stroke Foundation, and some of the other smaller things that we do. Again, I think all a little bit up in the air at this point. And then looking at the programs, the summer camp program, and then the senior trips, and what they generate, and those are program revenues, typically. So that's kind of where we are sitting right now. Obviously, if sales tax performance in 2021 mirrors what we saw in 2020, we'll be fine there, and we'll really be dealing with just the impact of those Parks and Recreation revenues on the bottom line for 2021. And so in that revised scenario A, we looked at you're going to increase that impact, obviously, as a result of that, and you're going to negatively impact your general fund balance to the tune of about $1.1 million. And understand again that that's showing the worst case scenario, or where we estimate reductions on the revenue side, without trying to estimate any reductions or savings on the expenditure side. And we know we always are able to generate those. So as we looked at expenses, I know I've talked with several of you about what are some of the projects that maybe didn't get finished in 2020 that we have an expended budget for. Are there things that we can put on hold that can help us as we move into and through 2021? And quite honestly, because of the situation that we were in when we put the 2021 budget together, we were very, very conservative in terms of kind of larger projects or anything that we added. We didn't add any new positions in the budget. And we really didn't add any other than just replacement of equipment, particularly in the Public Works Department. We really didn't have big projects. We're recommending that we would move forward with really all of those things that were originally anticipated. The Public Works equipment, which I didn't outline in the memo, but the Public Works equipment, both of the pieces of equipment that are estimated or were scheduled are overdue in their replacement cycles. And so we really have pushed the useful life of those pieces of equipment, one of which is pretty significant in terms of the work that we do in-house with street maintenance. And so as we emphasize and focus on our street maintenance program, being able to keep that equipment operational and in place is we think a pretty important priority. Then other than that, we really have building, permitting, and code enforcement software in the Community Development Department. That $40,000 that was budgeted. I know Brian has done some preliminary work around an RFP, but we haven't issued an RFP or selected a vendor for that particular project. But we really are living on borrowed time with the existing software that we have. It's kind of a hand-me-down system from when we used to partner with the county or contract with the county for that. And I believe that's the I don't know what kind of time frame, Brian, you're probably looking at, I don't know, summer or so before you'd be ready to make a decision on or bring forward a recommendation on that. So, that's
Issuing
something we
RFPs
can-
in the next couple months. Yeah, probably summertime
Yeah.
before we make a decision.
So we've got some time there, but I think that's one that we feel like is important to continue to move forward. And then the other one was really just a carryover from the 2019 budget into 2020 and then into 2021. And that was the addition or the conversion of kind of two positions that had been authorized for overhire and converting those positions to permanent positions and creating a directed patrol unit. For a variety of reasons, we haven't been able to get staffing at the level where we were able to kind of get that directed patrol unit implemented. And as I've talked with Chief Madden, I think, as we move into these budget discussions, I know the council has expressed, questions, and we really want to look at not only the police operations, but really all of our department operations in terms of expenses. And so I think right now we're committed to just holding. We are at currently 28 sworn positions that are filled. And so we would not look at moving forward to fill to that level of 31. Our plan is to come back at a work session next month and talk to you a little bit about the structural changes that I think the chief is looking at in the department, along with some other classification compensation issues citywide. So we'll have the opportunity to kind of start to dive into those conversations around there. So you do have the opportunity there. And again, I did not take that reduction out of the expenditure side, but if, we hold those 2 positions in the police department, we had estimated those at about $135,000 in savings. If you couple that with the savings that we know we have in our health insurance premiums and kind of the other vacant positions that we currently have in the city, you're probably getting close to, I would imagine, you could turn that typical $200,000 into closer to $450,000 to $500,000 in savings by the time we got to the end of 2021. Then we just kind of outlined for you in the memo the other positions and where they're budgeted, and then where we're currently staffed. So we have, although we didn't implement a specific hiring freeze throughout 2020, we were very deliberate in filling positions, both in the timing of that and looking at the need. So we've filled public works positions, for example. Penn's had a number of positions, facility and maintenance supervisor, and some others that have been vacant that we've filled just to kind of keep up with operations and align with some of our other priorities. We still have a position in the community development department. We have 1 position in public works, 1 position in parks and recreation, which we are actively recruiting for. That is our aquatics coordinator's position. And if we are serious about opening the pool for the 2021 season, we will need the aquatics coordinator position in order for that to be a successful endeavor. And then, as we mentioned, the 2 positions originally anticipated for the directed patrol unit being held vacant in the police department. So really, I mean, that's kind of where we are. I don't think any of us have kind of the magic solution. I think we all wish we could wave a wand and fix the revenue challenges that we've experienced at the community center. I know Penn and his staff are doing, really everything they can to be creative in terms of programming and look at new revenue generation and revenue generating opportunities. They're just really few and far between. I think overall, from my perspective, that, I think as I look at where I think we will recover through 2021 and going into 2022, I think we certainly have the flexibility to do that with the fund reserves and the general fund reserves that we have. There is another option if we're uncomfortable with a burden that we feel like that places on the general fund. There are Parks and Recreation sales tax revenues that may be used for operations. and could provide kind of that short-term relief. Obviously, that would take away from capital projects at the community center and potentially some of the things that we've been discussing in some of our outdoor park systems. But that is when that ballot language was put in place, those sales tax revenues were authorized for use in day-to-day operations as well as capital projects. So I think really, we've built this budget. When we look at it in either scenario A or scenario B, and I didn't build out the tables, but when we leave our fund balance in the general fund, kind of the untouchable from our perspective as we put together and built any of these models or scenarios is that 25% general fund reserve. So regardless of anything else that happens, we're not going to propose or bring forward a suggestion that would even begin to impact that. If we look at the other things that are obligated out of that general fund balance at the end of scenario A or scenario B, which includes kind of about $184,000 in funds that we're holding that we collect through municipal court for ADA improvements. So they're restricted in terms of their use. We have about $100,000 that we've carried in that general fund balance intended for financial management software. And then there's $200,000 in that fund balance that has that we've received from EPC over the last 18 months under the terms of their development agreement. And then about $16,000 in carryover for the Direction Finder survey, which will be moving forward here in the next few weeks and months as the comp plan progresses. So we still end up with excess fund balance. It's certainly not the 1.7 million that we have today as we stand, but under scenario A, we'd have about $572,000 in excess fund balance. And under scenario B, that number gets impacted more dramatically, obviously, but we'd have about $285,000 in excess fund balance. So I'm going to stop there. Certainly interested in thoughts, concerns, considerations. Then we'll kind of jump back into what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? How does this impact our budget conversations?
Mayor, I have a question about the federal legislation that's going through. Do you have any sense of how that will impact or potentially impact the city revenue if that does pass?
The second stimulus piece?
Yes.
I think we're trying to figure that out. I mean, certainly if it passes, there will be a direct allocation to the city. It will not be a pass through or will not be sort of we will not have to rely on the county to allocate those funds directly to the city. I don't know what that is. I know there's a call. Councilmember Flores sent me some information on a call that the NLC is having kind of an update on that on Friday. So I'll try to be on that. What we don't know entirely is what we'll be able to use that for. We've advocated all along the way that really be available to cities to replace lost revenue as a result of the pandemic. But that I know there's been a lot of push and pull as that legislation has sort of moved through. So where we end up, I don't know. I mean, certainly that's another factor. And thank you for bringing that up, that could impact that bottom line positively. It's just going to depend on what strings are attached to it, right? So we've started some conversations internally. I don't know what we would do because I think we'd have to get somewhat creative. I think we exhausted a lot of our ideas with the $300,000 that we got from the first CARES Act allocation from the county in terms of having to spend that on COVID related, sort of new improvements. So we're hopeful that it will allow us to, not have that same focus, but, and I think we'll be able to answer that question sooner rather than later, obviously.
Trent and then Solly.
I had a question for Laura. On page 6 at the bottom on the summer camp, it says about the 105,000 for the cap was the kind of the revised figure, but then on page 13, the 2021 revised for the summer camp program was 175,000. So I didn't know maybe if I was just misreading something on that, or if you could just kind of speak to that delta.
So I don't have the same page numbers, but it's part of that's a change. So let me share again. Part of that may be it's just a change, I think, in the work in progress. So is it 13 in the packet?
Yeah, PDF 6 in the packet and then PDF 13 in the packet.
Let me go back and look at that, but I think probably what that is a continued sort of downward revision of what we really think those revenues are, and I may not have caught it. I'll go back and look. I may not have caught that in every place.
Okay.
But I know that we're gonna, I know that one of the things that we're looking at, typically we run a summer camp program that accommodates 180 campers.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I guess just thinking about the summer camp, then it's probably more accurate to think about it in terms of like the 105 number going forward, then is kind of what we're saying. Okay. Cool.
Okay, I think Sally had a question.
Yeah, I had a question on the personnel line on page 3 of our packet, but sort of that chart on the first page of your memo, Laura. So I know our 2020 budget originally was 7.875 million for personnel, and it ended up being 6.995, and then it's going to be back up to 7.965. And so I was wondering, is that whole 2020 reduction, is that explained by the positions left open that then would be filled in 2021 to go back up? Brian's nodding. Is that that's
Yes.
the difference?
Yeah. So if you look at, so you're right. So our 2020 budget at 7.8 million roughly. So we budget every year as if we are fully staffed for the entire year.
Okay.
In addition to that, when we put the budget together, we don't have our health insurance renewal for the coming year. And so we try, depending on how much flexibility we have in the budget, we try to budget somewhere between 5 and 10% for an increase in health insurance premiums. So
Okay.
that was included in the 2020 budget, that 7.8 million. And it's also, you see that reflected in the 7.9 million that was originally adopted for 2021. So the big, we didn't add any positions, but so what you're seeing reflected there is an anticipated increase in health insurance premiums, and then just merit pool and some of that incremental growth in other salaries.
Okay.
So that's the difference. And then yes, I mean, we just, through holding positions vacant and those health insurance savings in 2020, we were almost $1 million below what that originally budgeted figure was.
Okay.
Hillary?
And then, yep.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. Nope, go ahead.
Hillary, you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering, Laura, you've mentioned us subsidizing the aquatic center of $125,000 on average every year, and I'm just wondering, by that same kind of logic, what we subsidize the community center at on an average year, and then compared to this past year and/or anticipations for 2021.
I can certainly calculate the subsidy figures. I haven't looked at that specifically, but I can do that and share that back. Historically, for about the last, I would say 10 years or so, we've subsidized the community center somewhere between, I don't know, the cost recovery is somewhere between 75 to 80, low 80%. So we're subsidizing, 20 to 25% of that operations. And obviously that dollar amount changes. I don't have.
So in 2021, how much are we anticipated to spend on the community center? And then I guess my follow-up question to that would be what kind of cost saving? I know that staff, thoroughly kind of went through and slashed when we originally did our budget, last summer. But I'm just curious, what kind of cost savings we've experienced at the community center with a reduction of hours, reduction of days, probably reduction of classes, contractors, et cetera.
I don't have hard copy sitting here with me of the 2021 budget. So I don't have Easewell here. I can probably tell you. I do have a December financial. So I can tell you where we ended expense wise. And so if there's Penn who might be sitting in his office, I don't know, Brian, if you have a budget with you where you are. Last year's total budget for the community center was roughly 2.6 million. And that includes personnel, contractuals, and commodities. And they ended the year spending just slightly over 2 million. So they saved about $538,000 in the 2020 budget. And operating costs through about 300,000 of that total was in personnel. So that was pretty significant. And then I can certainly pull those figures together for 2021.
I thank you so much for that. I'm sorry you didn't have it in front of you. I'm just thinking that maybe next time we do our dig in, I know we do it in the budget process where we have, kind of program by program or department by department, maybe for the community center, since it's been so heavily impacted, being able to look at like a budget worksheet a little bit more in depth with the community center would be helpful. So we could, see where we're having the greatest cost savings this year, knowing that, we're doing everything that we can, even though we know that the revenue side is lacking.
Well, and when you say, are you just interested in the line item detail? I mean, is that?
I'm thinking about, the budget that I think it's a budget worksheet that, all the department heads do every year. And I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but I just remember, line item detailed, not, crazy detail, right? But just kind of, I think that would be helpful because I imagine there's some things like our special events that we would have budgeted for. I don't know how much, but I imagine we aren't spending that. And I'm just curious where our cost savings are in the community center. And, by this, the general fund summary, we just can't quite see that.
Yep, hang on just one second. Well, and it's, obviously, I mean, part of that challenge, and I'll pull it up here in a very non-pretty format. Maybe. Now I can't get back to you all.
No rush, Laura. You could always,
No, that's okay. No, we've got it. Hang on just a moment. I just couldn't get back to the Zoom meeting. mean, part of that challenge is going to be it until, in another, we don't have kind of much expense data, but so this is from the January 2021 interim financial report, which was part of our council packet this past month. We can look at.
Can you enlarge that a little?
Is that better?
Yeah, that helps.
I mean, absolutely, there are some things here. We just don't, part of it is we don't know. And so you're right. We may have some savings in some of our special events, but that's a pretty insignificant part of the budget, I think, each year, and again, every dollar that we can sort of cobble together and save there is important. But we don't know. I mean, if, our hope would be that we can bring back, whether or not they are the traditional special events, but our hope is that there will be some level of special events that are available. And we have the opportunity to provide to our residents and patrons through the course of this year.
And Laura, I just pulled up on my other computer kind of what I was envisioning or thinking of back to the budget. I know that's hard to see.
So no, so
that budget worksheet is what I would.
No, and that's the same. That's the pretty version of what's on the screen right now. So this is your governmental report, which is going to have all of those line items, and then it's going to show you, by category, what we've got. So, part of this is, there are some equipment and supplies and program supplies. Some of the bigger costs in contractuals, contract instructors, we may have some savings in some of those areas. But I guess, is that what you would like to see? You want us to kind of go through at this point and identify where we think we're going to have that level of savings?
I personally would love to see, the anecdotal side of what we're doing at the community center to, make sure that we're, reducing costs as much as we can, knowing how reduced revenues are. So yeah, that would be great for me. Doesn't have to be tonight or tomorrow, but sometime when we have this next conversation.
All right, Sally, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Anybody else have a question for Laura or comment?
I do. I have a quick one. Laura, under expenses, what is our cost for WCA coming out of? Contractual, commodity, solid waste, or what?
We have a separate fund. So we have the solid waste utility fund, and in that solid waste utility fund, we assess each year as part of every resident's tax bill, a portion of that fee that goes to pay WCA's, monthly bills. And so all of those revenues that we collect from the county on the property tax bill go into that solid waste utility fund. And then there's a gap. And so each year there's a little bit of a gap, and the council historically has made a decision to subsidize a portion of that. So what you see reflected in this summary, in that $75,000, is that portion of the remainder of the annual trash contract, which is about $600,000 a year in total.
Okay, thanks.
So really, I mean, in terms of impact on our other funds, I think the only place where we'll have, outside of the general fund, where we probably have a more extended conversation, is going to be in the stormwater utility fund. The other funds, I think, from where we put them together from a budgetary standpoint, will be fine.
had another quick question.
Yes, Trent.
So we had mentioned another scenario of, potentially moving some PRT sales tax money over for ops support. Is that sort of a realistic option? Is that kind of like a last resort option? And if so, I know you said we would kind of have to scale back some of the other discussions we've been having about our city park presence and what that would look like. Certainly, we don't have to like get into the weeds on that, but can you just kind of speak a little bit more on what that option looks like and what that would entail too?
I think you would just, authorize us to do that. And you would authorize that transfer from the Parks and Recreation Sales Tax Fund. I think several things to consider there. I think part of it is, a comfort level with, I know that there has been concern about a reduction in using reserves to kind of keep our budget balanced through the course of that. And obviously that's not something that is sustainable for the long term. I believe it's sustainable through the end of 2021. And again, we've been very specific in preserving our true rainy day fund, which is that 25%, fund balance. So part of what, I'll come back to kind of the next step, but as far as PRT goes, the question would be about 50% of the revenues in the Parks and Recreation sales tax currently are dedicated to debt service on the outdoor aquatic center. And we have debt service obligations on the MFAC we make our last debt service payment in September of 2023. We stop collecting revenues in that fund or from that sales tax in March of 2023. So we have to, number one priority, regardless of anything else we do out of that fund, we have to make sure that we're watching and managing to ensure that we have enough debt service reserve to make that final debt service payment in September of 2023. We currently have, I think we're probably close to $900,000, if not more, in reserve in that fund, and the debt service payment is about $500,000. So one, we have to make sure that we have enough money to make that last debt service payment, or make our debt service payments really in 2021, 2022, and 2023. So we haven't seen a decline in sales tax revenue, but part of what we want to do is make sure we don't spend down every last penny there either, because we do have those debt service obligations. And then it's a question of still the kind of the next biggest piece that comes out of that Parks and Recreation sales tax are capital projects at the Powell Community Center. And I know Penn and I have already talked about, and reviewed those projects that are on and included in the CIP for 2021, and which ones we feel like we can or should, hold pending kind of where we see things trending with revenues for just that reason. So, I think that's something we could certainly watch. We can't go and take a big chunk of money to make up all of this difference. Certainly the Parks and Recreation Sales Tax Fund cannot support all of the additional, decreases in revenues that we've seen at the community center. But could it offset, $150 or so, $200,000? Probably. But I think we'd really want to look at that and then, look at the implications. There's a kind of a placeholder for outdoor park amenities to be determined. Any of the larger scale improvements that we're sort of visioning and planning and thinking about now in our outdoor parks are going to be possible with renewal of a sales tax, not with existing, sales tax revenue. So we can certainly do some additional outlining of all of that as well.
All right,
Thanks.
I would like to make a comment, and then Sally has a question. Many times when we have these budget discussions, I always feel like there's a sense of doom that we're discussing, and that is not the case at all. We are in excellent financial shape due to the stewardship of staff We did revise our budgets. We did acknowledge the conditions we were under. We do have our 25% reserve covered. And what is our balance in excess of 25% projected for 21? Laura, remind me.
Depends on the scenario. I think somewhere between 300 and $500,000.
Okay, so in excess of the 25% reserve, which is there to give us flexibility to deal with unforeseen circumstances. And we have just dealt with, I'd say, one of the biggest unforeseen circumstances in quite a while. And we have come through it, I think, very, very well financially. We're not as good as we were a year ago in a position, but considering what we went through, I think we're doing outstanding. So I guess I'm just trying to make sure we understand that the sky isn't falling. And I don't think we should be taking any drastic measures. I think the PRT money should stay in PRT. We have the 25% covered. We have $300,000 to $500,000 in excess, projected for 21. And if we take the money out of Parks and Rec, then we have a plan to do our playgrounds and our parks, and we're taking money from that strategy. So let's just remember, it's all one big bucket, even though it's designated to different things, and some you can't use. You can't cross lines with some you can. But I think we're again, unless Brian and Laura tell me that what I'm saying is incorrect, I really feel like we are really in pretty good shape. Would you guys agree with that, Laura, Brian?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right. Sally, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, I think I finally solved it looking at the page again, but the pool revenue revisions, putting it back in, is the reduction from the 155 to the 108, is that just based on capacity limitations and things that we're envisioning will happen if we do open the pool?
Yes.
Okay, and then my other question is, we were talking about the pool, which we do offset, and then the summer camp, which brings in money, yay. And so I just wondered, in staff's view, are those things disconnected budget-wise or connected? So like if we can't open camp, we'd still plan to move ahead with the pool. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding.
I think our plan at this point, and that's something that will be on our agenda next week at the committee meeting, is we'll share more in detail kind of where we are in terms of our planning to be able to open the pool safely and to operate a summer camp. Obviously we've shared reopening strategies and matrices for the last year, and we want to make sure that the council's comfortable kind of with our planning efforts. But we've been moving forward with the goal of being able to open the pool, recognizing that there will be, operating limitations and potentially capacity limitations. I think we addressed and shared with you all briefly that, we've kind of solved the training challenges that we were up against, guards. We've been advertising for guards. That in both the case of the summer camp and the pool, I think, and Penn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our biggest challenge at this point is getting enough staff to be able to do it safely, hiring enough lifeguards and enough camp counselors. So we're trying to get over that hurdle first. And then if we can get over that hurdle, I think we have some plans that, will allow us to feel comfortable in being able to bring both of those things back online.
So are we going to see a really good summer camp video ad, like the pool ad, Penn?
Maybe. I wish, yeah. You should have seen the Google the analytics we were looking at with Crux today on that specific post. It was pretty, what do we usually get? 200 views or something like that. And we've had almost 2,000 views on that post. So I think we've only generated 2 guard applications as a result, but not for lack of trying to get the word out. So, I mean, we're really trying on that. And Penn will tell you that I'm giving him a lot of gray hair with respect to the summer camp. Yep. and that piece of it, because again, I think that is one where when we start to bring the camp numbers down, obviously that the opportunity for camp to be a revenue generator for us, is on that sliding scale. And so we want to be really sensitive. I can tell you, we put out some information taking pre-registrations, letting our families know that certainly it was all subject to any of the COVID regulations. But kind of took that step looking at, is there an interest? Do we have spots that we could fill? And I think the majority of those folks have indicated it would be their intent to spend, I think in most cases, all 8 weeks of the summer with us in that program. So trying to explore, and make sure, if you build it, they will come, right? We want to make sure that that's going to happen with summer camp. So again, we'll have a lot of that kind of detail and information to share. We can certainly work on some, more specific line item budget detail at the community center in terms of what are they doing, and where are those savings opportunities? What are we doing? And we can certainly, if part of that's, if you're interested in having that information anecdotally, so you can share it with, our residents, we can do that. I will tell you that just in the, experience that I have with the entire organization, that's just an ongoing way of life for every single one of our departments. And so I think everybody, including the Parks and Recreation Department, is looking at their budgets and thinking about, opportunities for that. So we can certainly do it in parks for the community center, Parks and Recreation, but may hit some of those high points in some of the other departments as well. And I think the other thing, I know a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about, the challenges, a desire to think about a retreat, and thinking that perhaps a virtual retreat wasn't something that might be as effective as we would like, and thinking about some type of survey. But, I think it will be helpful as we go into the budget process. We'll try to get a survey out so that we can look at kind of goals and priorities, because I think the reality is, let's just say we end, everything is way rosier than what we have anticipated. And we've got still have that $1.7 million in excess fund balance. My guess is that, how many do we have? 4, 12, 15 of us on this Zoom call tonight would all probably spend that $1.7 million a little bit differently. And so it may be a really good exercise for us to, if you got to wave your magic wand and have complete control over where that $1.7 million went, how would you spend it? So we can kind of help align projects and priorities, because what I'd really like to see, and, again, I think, and I appreciate the mayor's comments, I do think we're in, it's not a gloom and doom situation. We certainly need to be aware of and cognizant of the things that could impact our budget. But again, we don't ever operate in a budget vacuum, and some years you just have your fingers in more holes in the dike than others. But there's never enough money to do everything that we want to do. But what I would love to see us do as we move into this kind of budget process for 2022 is to think about, okay, let's think about those things that we would like to do. What was everybody hoping that we could do with the excess fund balance that we had? And then as we improve our financial situation over the course of this year, which I am confident that we will do, then let's add those things back in, right? So rather than feeling like it is a takeaway necessarily, let's prioritize those things. Let's try to build some consensus around those priorities. And then let's be able to, feel good about being able to add those things back in, because we've managed the resources effectively over the course of the year.
Any more questions or comments?
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you all, and we'll keep working on it.
All right. Well, no more questions or comments, then I'd
I
say
have
we,
one- I
oh,
have
go
one
ahead,
comment.
Debbie.
Sorry. I just want to thank you, Emily, for giving us the heads up on the new urgent care coming in via email. When you send us new businesses coming on board, it really keeps us apprised of what to tell our constituents, and I just want to thank you for that.
For sure. And I'll pass thanks along to Caitlin and Brian and community development. And we talked about it and working together, and I think it's working. So that's great.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
All
We'll
right.
See everybody later.
Thanks.
We are adjourned.
Good night.